Hello, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Alicia Post. I am the National Program and Communications Director at the American Zionist Movement, or AZM. AZM is comprised of 33 national Zionist Jewish organizations working across a broad ideological, political, and religious spectrum, linking the American Jewish community together in support of Israel, Zionism, and the Jewish people. AZM is the U.S. Zionist Federation in the World Zionist Organization and facilitated last year's U.S. election to the World Zionist Congress, where 123,000 American Jews voted for their voice in Israel. A few housekeeping notes for today's webinar. This program is being recorded and will be available for viewing after. An email with the link will be sent out to all of you who are joining us today. Everyone is welcome to put your questions in the Q&A section, and we will try to get to as many as time permits. Today's discussion is about the holiday Tu B'Shvat and connecting to the land of Israel. If you saw AZM's e-blast this week, then you know that the 15th day of the Hebrew month of Shvat is celebrated this year, January 27th and 28th. This Wednesday night through Thursday. Tu B'Shvat is an ideal time to focus on Israel and infuse Zionist identity with a green consciousness. A fun fact connecting us to the land is also the same day the Knesset held its inaugural session in 1949. Happy anniversary to the Parliament of Israel. So since you are here, you have already made a connection. You may also find additional resources, materials, and activities on our website, azm.org/tu-bishvat. That's TU-BSHVAT. We'll put it in the chat, and also you can always go to azm.org on our main site under programs in the holiday section. So without further ado, today we are joined by a very special guest, Aryeh Green. Aryeh was born in Washington, D.C., grew up in San Francisco, and made Aliyah in 1984. Aryeh is the author of the book, My Israel Trail, about hiking the 600-mile Israel National Trail and the search for peace in the Middle East. Chief Strategy Officer of Energizer Global, an Israeli developer of renewable energy projects for Africa, Director Emeritus of Media Central, a Jerusalem-based project supporting services for foreign journalists based in or visiting Israel, former policy advisor to Natan Sharansky, and executive consulting for leading Israeli companies. Aryeh is known as a dynamic, knowledgeable, passionate, inspiring speaker for communities and campuses alike, with unique perspectives on Israel and the Jewish issues. A final fun fact is that in his spare time, I hear that Aryeh grows grapes and makes wine. So thank you so much, Aryeh, for being here with us today. And I will happily now turn it over to you. And once again, everyone, you can ask questions and answers, and we'll get to as many as possible.
Wow. Okay. Thank you very much, Alicia, for that introduction. I'm delighted to be here and delighted to be here with all of you. And especially delighted because I love this season. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully be able to share with you a number of very enjoyable views of the Israel that we all know and love at this season of Tu B'Shvat. And I have to admit that Tu B'Shvat has a real resonance, I think, for many of us who come from North America or Europe, or in fact, I suppose Australia, anywhere else from around the world, because in Jewish tradition, we actually kind of time our prayers and our prayerful understanding of the flow of the seasons of the year connected to the land of Israel. And therefore, it kind of doesn't matter wherever you are, cold or wet or in the snow in North America or Europe, or of course, if you're down under in Australia, I guess in the heat of summer. But to celebrate what is basically Israel's Arbor Day, our connection to nature and the environment, the New Year for the trees, as it's called, is something that's very special, I think, for all of us as Jews, having a connection to this land, and a connection which is something that we have had and maintained for over the last 2,000 years, in our prayerful, as I said, connection to the seasons in Israel. And I decided that today I wanted to start with a real feel for the land, and for this particular season. What you're looking at now are some photos and videos which I actually took today on my bike ride here in the Jerusalem hills, to really start off with a feeling of what it's like to be in Israel in and around Tu B'Shvat, and around this kind of beginning of, I can't even say spring, but yes, it's the first blossoming. It's, as the rabbis talked about in the Gemara and the Talmud, when the sap is rising in the trees. It's still cold, it's still winter, but it's the beginning of the rejuvenation, the rebirth, as it were, of nature and our connection to the environment and ecology and what have you. Is kind of part and parcel of the beauty, the holiness, the wonder of living here in the land of Israel, which I have done for the last 35 years or so. And so I wanted to start with these images so that we could kind of get into the spirit of the time of year, as it were. You know, the Kabbalah, the holy mystical tradition of Israel, talks about Tu B'Shvat as a time of kind of coming inward as the winter is turning to spring, to find ways to seek out the wisdom of the universe, almost, and the wisdom of our traditions, to elevate our lives, to rejuvenate, to get into this kind of feeling of rebirth of the spring, in order to improve our character, in order to aspire to a sense of greatness. And this idea of personal growth and rebirth is something that informs greatly kind of everything I want to share with you and to talk about today when we talk about the land of Israel and hiking, especially on the Israel Trail. I have to be frank that when Alicia and Herbert and the heads of the American Zionist movement asked me to speak today, I had to give some thought to making this kind of a fun exploration of the land of Israel. And really, to be honest, we're using Tu B'Shvat as a pivot or as an excuse to enjoy and to explore the land of Israel together. Most of the discussion over the next 30 minutes and the photos and the videos I want to share with you are from the trip that I took, the hike that I took on the Israel National Trail. The Israel National Trail, as you may know, is about 750 miles long, and it is a wonderful way of understanding and experiencing and exploring the land of Israel. And although, of course, between COVID, Corona, and other limitations, you may not be able to walk the land right now, but I hope you'll enjoy in the next half hour walking with me. And I actually want to get started before kind of explanations and going into any more detail of my experience and the journey that I went through, the personal growth, as well as the actual physical journey, which I'll talk about a lot. I want to kind of jump into it to give you the feeling, for those of you joining us today, kind of what it's really like. So here's a first kind of taste of the quiet of the desert in the hills just above Eilat, that you can virtually walk with me and take a breath and just hear the silence. I guess I go that way. Now, I don't know if you can get the feel really for that desert experience, the quiet, the silence, but I wanted you to have a little bit of that initial taste. Just to put the walk we're going to do together in context, in February of 2014, I set out to hike the Israel National Trail, what's known in Hebrew as Shvil Yisrael. As I said, about 700 miles long from Eilat in the south of the country, heads up to the border of Lebanon in the north. So I did it in 2 months without a break. I did it all alone with a 50-pound pack on my back. And then I did it at age 51, which is a bit unusual. The normal cohort that does the Israel Trail is kind of after the army, the 21-year-old crowd. This is something of a challenge for a casual hiker at age 51. I did about 12 miles a day, somewhere between 10 or 15 miles a day. And the truth is that alone with my thoughts, I experienced a real transformation. And I think a somewhat unique perspective on the history of the land and our people, the vistas and the nature of the Holy Land. Kind of not by the way, I was looking to heal because I was just 6 weeks after a devastating divorce, which I hadn't actually looked for. It was not my choice. My world had been turned upside down. I was angry and frustrated and full of resentment. I was, I guess, mostly sad and in pain. And I meditated on mountaintops. I cried in dry creek beds. I wrote anguished journal entries, composed songs to lift my spirits. I looked back and inward and up to the night sky and over the valley to the next mountain, down at the ants in the dirt and back along the trail to see how far I'd come. And what I discovered on the Shvil was kind of a sense of self, a sense of personal and also national history and a perspective of sorts on the human condition and on our connection to the land. And the truth is that I realized a lot of the things that I learned on the Shvil, lessons that I learned from the actual physical hiking itself, really helped me in my personal journey to heal from my personal, well, to face my personal challenges, to heal from my divorce, and to help me to really move ahead with my life. And I'll mention as we go through the walk together, this kind of other aspect, which is the other subject of my book, the 5 lessons that I learned as I walked the length and breadth of the land, because trudging through the land of milk and honey really gave me the ability to have this kind of a perspective, much to my surprise, I would say, because that's not really what I'd set out to do. I'd set out kind of to escape. I certainly didn't expect or plan to write a book about the experience, but let's get started together hiking the Israel Trail. The first week in the Eilat Mountains is and was a real challenge, because I would literally find myself on a cliffside and not be able to figure out where I'm going to go from there and to move forward. But that initial video that I shared with you, I want to share another one in a minute. The silence and the aloneness of being in the desert was something that I found tremendously valuable. It was liberating. It was uplifting. It was something that connected me also with our history, the history of our people wandering through the desert. I felt like I was one of the children of Israel wandering through the desert. And yet, on the other hand, being alone and walking day after day, well, hour after hour, minute after minute, through the silence of the desert, really gave me something of a perspective. Really helped me to feel not that my problems and my pain weren't important, but somehow it made it more manageable. It reduced the intensity by giving me the feeling that I'm just part of something bigger than myself. And that sense of humility, that sense of modesty or perspective, I think also is something that we learn from our Jewish perspective. If we think of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Moses, who was defined by his humility and our understanding of how we can uh, um, put into perspective our problems by recognizing our place in the universe, was for me a very, very important lesson, the first lesson of the trail, this sense of humility. Well, the second lesson, which also came about from the desert, in fact, the next step, which I'll share with you, moving a little bit north from those Eilat Mountains into the central Negev, was also to a great extent brought about by this silence and the challenges of the desert. Walk with me a little bit more now, and perhaps later in the chat, you can ask me, or you can even try and guess and identify where these videos or these pictures are from. And again, I want you to get the feeling of, yes, there's wind, but mainly just silence and being alone in the desert. So yes, somebody said it was that the wilderness of sin, and that was actually earlier. And this is the area near Hod Akev, right near Sedei Boker. Now, I had a very interesting experience that I want to share with you in this area, which kind of led, or at least partially led or influenced the next lesson that I want to share with you. I recorded here as I got to the edge of a cliff, a specific experience. Looking down here from the cliff, now you can see the recording where I almost fell off this cliff. So, I took a photo of this. I don't know if you can see it in the shade. I'm assuming you can. This, I'm supposed to do the 24 kilo pack. I don't think so. It's just not going to happen. See those two guys down there? Or can I zoom in with this? There's two guys down there. And I asked them when they were about over here on the cliffside, and they were sliding down that part on their bottom, and they have no teak, no tarmil. I said, is this going to be possible with a 24 kilo pack? And they said no. They said, don't try it. There's a sakanat mavet, they said, danger of death if you try and do that with a 50-pound, 25 kilo pack on your back. So this kind of led to, or was part of the second lesson that I learned, which was acceptance. Recognizing that if you're on the side of a cliff and you have to make a decision, nobody can help you to get out of that situation. That you have to recognize, this is where I am, and I need to now make a good decision and deal with what is to a certain extent. This acknowledgement of reality was kind of like that humility in the desert. It was liberating. It was a cathartic feeling. And it was a real kind of, I remember reading when I was writing my book, a quote by Michael Fox, who said, acceptance doesn't mean resignation. It means understanding that something is what it is and that there's got to be a way through it. And as I'm sure you know, Michael Fox had his own challenges to face. The point is, this isn't to say, I'm sharing with you some views from the side of the Carbolit, the hardest day on the entire trek, up the side of the Carbolit in the middle of the Negev. There's a cliff, another cliff, on the rim of a crater. But the point is that it's not to say that we can't or shouldn't work to change our reality, or ourselves for that matter. This kind of acceptance, it's just the first step in mapping our paths towards that change. You know, the pithy folk aphorism about accepting the things that I cannot, I think that gets it exactly right, acknowledging that there are specific aspects of life that we just don't have control over. So I wandered my way from the central Negev up to the northern part of the Negev, and kind of the next slide gives you a bit of a taste of the third lesson that I learned. That is walking after about 2.5 weeks through the desert, hour after hour, day after day, just these grays and browns and yellows of the desert. I saw my first bit of color, my first flower, and I cried. I mean, the truth is that whether it was a sunset or bird song or a stunning view, I had such a depth of appreciation, of gratitude for simple things like that first flower, which here you can see I took a picture of, that really filled me with a sense of appreciation. And that was the third lesson that I learned from the trip itself. And I was, of course, grateful for my family and friends who'd supported me throughout the difficult times of the divorce itself, and also who were supporting me on the hike itself. And I was grateful for friends like Prince Emmanuel Ben Yehuda in this picture, who was one of my hosts for a night. There's a unique institution in Israel called Trail Angels. There's in fact a new book out by a new friend of mine named Tzipi Moss called Angels and Tchina, which talks a lot more than I do in my book about the Trail Angels, unique to Israel and the Israel Trail, of people who open up their homes and host you for free if you're hiking the Israel Trail. People like Aryeh and Leah Schiff, who built this kind of Bedouin tents with an outdoor bathroom and shower in their backyard in memory of their son Ofer, who unfortunately had passed away in a car accident. But that issue of gratitude for me, for the Trail Angels, and for my friends and family who I said had supported me so much, and for just the privilege of being able to hike the trail and reconnect with our land and our forefathers, and feel this sense of oneness with our people and with our ancestral homeland. Here you can see a picture of the Judean Desert, the largest national or natural park reserve, nature reserve in Israel, is one which most people don't even know about. And if you ask me why, well, you can see from this picture. There's almost nothing there, rocks and dirt, literally for an 8-hour walk through it. And it was along this part of the trail that I started to develop even more this sense of appreciation and sense of gratitude. And that was a crucial step for me on the path that I was finding, the path to healing, because I found it made coping with the suffering and moving beyond the suffering really possible. The truth is, I was grateful for many aspects of my life, as I mentioned, including counterintuitively my marriage, because we had built a beautiful home and family here in our ancestral homeland and raised our 3 children. And it was something which I definitely reflected on and was contemplating in the course of my walk. And this kind of appreciation was definitely a crucial step for me on the path to healing. I found it made coping with the suffering and moving beyond it possible. here's me walking through the forest of Yatir. You can see how we're transitioning here in the northern Negev from the browns and grays and blacks and yellows of the desert into more of kind of a mountainous tree area. And that transition was very much part of what I was going through also. A transition from sadness and pain to some sense of acceptance and gratitude and hope. And that's when I found myself moving towards literally my home. This is uh, what I would call circumnavigating home. The middle week of the trail for me was going up towards Beit Shemesh and around up to Jerusalem and back, and moving from that acceptance to that gratitude as I walked through the Hebron Hills and the Jerusalem Hills, and really feeling grateful for everything, for my daughter-in-law's walking sticks that she'd given me, to the Snickers bar that I had. You saw me eating there on the side of the carbolet, and of course also to the wonderful and fulfilling life that I had shared with my wife in building a Bayit Ne'eman b'Yisrael, quite literally a faith-filled home in Israel, here in the land of our forefathers. Well, I made my way in and around Jerusalem, feeling much more comfortable, because this is an area that was my home, that I biked through and walked through, and this is the trail, the train path going up to Jerusalem that I had taken many, many times. It made me think of a quote that I heard once. I mentioned this in my book, from Lao Tzu, who said once, "Be content with what you have, rejoice in the way things are. When you realize there is nothing lacking, the whole world belongs to you." And he finishes, "From wonder into wonder, existence opens." And it's that kind of wonder, that kind of gratitude that I really was able to achieve. Here, by the way, you see me on the Roman road, where the Romans had built steps in the road in order to get their animals and their material and their war machines up to Jerusalem in the siege of Jerusalem, in order to make the climb easier. And you can see the little smirk that I have there is very much part of me feeling like, well, where are the Romans, as Mark Twain once said. We're here, we have returned, and the Romans are gone. I'm going through a few photos quickly of friends who I had met with. My kids had surprised me and took me out to dinner. A bit surreal, as you can imagine, because I was in the middle of this hike and they were in the middle of their normal everyday lives. And yet walking around these scenes that you can see and perhaps be familiar with there in the Jerusalem Hills, spending a Shabbat out in the Shetach, out in the fields, near Mesilat Zion, very near actually Beit Shemesh, where I actually spent Purim. And I didn't go home. I didn't go home at all. In fact, I had a friend, this is my friend Aaron, who came and read the Megillah with me there in the field, in our campsite on Motzei Shabbat, and on Sunday, friends who came by and read Megillah again, and other friends who came at night, and we had a really fun time, of course, drinking Mrs. Purim around the campfire. And then I jumped up north, and I'll take you with me to the north of the country, because after Purim, I wanted to start here in the very, very north, Tel Dan and the border with Lebanon, and make my way down south for two reasons. One was because, as you'll see, the flowering, the blossoming of the early spring was already happening, as it is now in the north. And the author of the Red Guide, the guide to hiking the trail, had suggested this was something good to do. And I wanted to be able to actually walk home, to walk into my home, rather than ending up at the north and then taking a bus or getting picked up or something to head home. So I wandered through the north and ended up coming to a whole nother appreciation for so many aspects of the beauty of our country, partially because it reminded me of where I grew up in California. People don't often think of this, but Israel's a bit like California, with forests in the north and a desert in the south, and beaches or sea to the west, and mountains to the east. And I had done a lot of hiking with my kids, with my family, but had never actually really appreciated how similar to Northern California and Northern Israel is. And part of my walk in the north here uh, allowed me time to contemplate some of the issues that I'd been dealing with within my earlier career in studying international relations, working with Nathan Sharansky, working with the media, coming to some understanding of what really could bring about peace between us, between the Israelis and the Arabs. And one of the basic issues that I came to here in the north, including, you'll see some photos of walking through some Arab villages, is how important the issue of forgiveness is within the context of our relations with our neighbors. And that may well be the subject of my next book. So I'm not going into any details here, but it was also a very important element of my learnings about healing from my divorce. At one point in a spring that we saw a picture of just a few minutes ago, I reached a level of forgiveness, of understanding, a real kind of not just intellectual forgiveness of my wife for the decision that she took, but a heartfelt, gut-felt forgiveness for her for causing this pain, for splitting up and tearing up our family. And it was at that point I was really able to walk through, like this, the forest in Baram on the border with Lebanon, and really begin the process of moving beyond the pain and the suffering. And so forgiveness for me was the fourth lesson that I learned there in the north. Not that you should forgive and forget. This, by the way, is a little bit of a break from the intensity of telling the story and a break of the intensity of the hike itself. This was the little breakfast I had at the Aryeh Winery, which I can highly recommend. Those of you who've read the book or have heard my story before know that I made a little bit of a habit of stopping by wineries. As Alicia said in her introduction, I make wine as a hobby. I've made wine for the last 25 years or so. And Aryeh is one of my favorite wineries. I had a lovely breakfast and wine tasting there as I made my way here through the Baram forest. And there's no question that for me, that was a turning point there in the north, not just the green and the rebirth and the renewal of feeling alive, hiking through these hills that also reminded me of California, but also with these thoughts about the Arab-Israel conflict and the importance of forgiveness, reaching that additional deeper level of forgiveness for what had happened with my personal situation. I have to share with you actually one other element, which was wonderful and very connected also to this Tu B'Shvat theme of reconnecting with our land. I would walk through, especially in the north, really it was all through the country, through an area and discover and just stumble on historical relics which were phenomenal and very moving. This is simply a gut, a wine press, not even really excavated, just sitting on the side of the trail where 1,000, 2,000 years ago, there were Jews living here making wine, making olive oil, an incredible connection to our people and our heritage. Another great example of that, this is actually sitting on Mount Meron on Friday before making my way to Tzfat, to the holy city of Safed, of Tzfat, for Shabbat. But I wanted to share with you how I stumbled across a grave, a little tomb in the middle of the Baram forest. I don't have a picture of it, unfortunately. But I was ready for a rest, and I took off my backpack and took out my water, and I saw a plaque on the side of this tomb, and it said, "This is the tomb of Yeshayahu ben Amos." And I asked myself, who is Yeshayahu ben Amos? I've never heard of this particular. So I looked it up on Google. I had a phone with me and I turned it on and I had a reception. And whose tomb was this? In the middle of a forest, unmarked, without even a road paved to get to it. Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah. Yes, that one with the swords and plowshares, the one who's quoted on the portals of the United Nations, the one who is seen as the harbinger of the coming era of peace and harmony in the world. In the midst of a forest, I stumbled across the tomb of one of the greatest prophets of our people. And you can imagine that just doesn't happen anywhere else. It doesn't happen on the Appalachian Trail. It doesn't happen on the Pacific Crest Trail. This is the difference. This is the beauty of hiking our ancestral homeland, not only as a challenge course, not only as a wondrous celebration of nature and exploration, but as a way to connect, to reconnect with our people, with our land, with our history. So here's where the seventh week, the second to last week, took me from that area of the central Galilee over to the Mediterranean Sea. And as I walked, I had phenomenal experiences of and meetings with both different elements of nature, and as I mentioned, also walking through Arab Israel villages, meeting Bedouin and Druze and Muslim and Christian Arabs. And I'll take this moment just to note, if you can see my cursor, one of the questions asked me to describe the trail signs, which you've seen once or twice on some of the pictures. You can see here below the minaret on the wall, it looks like a right angle where the trail sign says turn left. And the trail sign for the Israel Trail is very specific. It has three colors, and those three colors are representative of the desert in the south and the snow in the mountains in the north, and blue for Israel with the sea. And when we see another sign, I'll give you a little bit more explanation of how it works and how you can kind of hope to feel that you're on the right path. Well, I took this video as I was in Jisr al-Zaqar, which is a small Arab town just north of Caesarea, as I started to walk up this rise towards the sea. And there's something about the sea that was phenomenal for me, both in terms of my own connection, because I love the sea, and also because of this feeling of just openness, of endless possibilities that we always feel when at the sea. And that basically brought me to the last week of the trail, where I went from Caesarea, then inland, and then down south to reach my way towards Beit Shemesh. And this last week had a number of elements to it, which brought me to the fifth lesson that I want to share with you and kind of finish up. It was a return to civilization to a certain extent, even though I was first walking along the sea and still spending a decent amount of time alone, as you can see here. But you know, I had a certain goal in this whole hike, and that goal was to hike the Israel Trail. Obviously, I had the goal of every day to get to the end of that day and to get to wherever I had put the water that was waiting for me in the desert, or to get to the end of that day's segment wherever I was in the country. I had those physical goals and the goal to hike the trail, but also, of course, I had a goal beyond that, not just to get to the top of that mountain or finish the trail or finish that week, but to move on with my life, not just to reach the end of the trail, but to be able to regroup. If we want to talk about Tu B'Shvat and rebirth and rejuvenation and the coming of the spring, that was my goal. Following my divorce, I wanted to get my life back on track. I wanted to perhaps find a new life partner. And I had different other personal aspirations relating to family, community, my professional career moves, or what have you. I mean, but on a more general level, I recognized that while I was on the trail that I kind of rediscovered, as it were, the spiritual and national and human goals that I've pursued since I was a young adult. I guess it wasn't really a coincidence that I found walking the land of Israel immensely uplifting because it combines so many of my personal values in one activity. I was walking in nature in the land of my people where our prophets and our forefathers lived and worked and fought and died. And obviously, where we introduced the ethical monotheism of Jewish thought and tradition to the world, and doing so at a time of reestablished independence here. I mean, this was, as one friend of mine, Moshe, suggested, it was just one long meditation. It combined my love of the outdoors with a deep emotional identification with the Zionist enterprise, and obviously a powerful aim to enhance and improve my spiritual and religious practice and commitment. And without question, I was able to recommit to my personal and national sense of mission and meaning in being part of this return to Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel after 2,000 years of dispersion. The truth is that I think we all can relate to that because we've had times of challenge, all of us, whether it's losing a job or a loved one or divorce or what have you. And this idea of rededicating ourselves or reestablishing goals that we can set for ourselves is something that I think we all can recognize as important, as crucial. There's a wonderful book that I talk about actually a lot in my book, which is Viktor Frankel's Man's Search for Meaning, where he talks about the importance, in order to give meaning to our life, the importance of having an objective, having a goal, having a reason to live. And at this point in the hike itself, I basically was nearing home, getting ready to finish the hike the last few days, and recognizing that I need to set goals for myself in my life, which I did. And here's another sign, here's another example of the trail sign just up closer, where in fact the trail goes left and I was going right. So this green arrow going right was a fitting, that's why I took this picture. But you can see here that the white is on the top and the desert, the orange is on the bottom. This is telling you that if you want to go towards the orange, towards the desert, it's leading the sign. So it tells you you need to go that way to the left in order to be heading in the right direction. So that's, somebody had asked in the chat about these signs. So I'm nearing the end of my story. We're nearing the end of my journey, and I thank you for joining with me in kind of the reenactment of it. Here, kind of the last day, the last morning, I set my. This is the night before. A friend came to visit me, Yaakov, on the last night. I was just about 10 kilometers from Beit Shemesh, and as you can see, another friend came to join us for our beer. But here we are at the last morning, and I obviously was taking stock and feeling as I both walked and as I thought and as I prepared and as I prayed in terms of starting out my morning, that at base, this combination of having a sense of humility and acceptance and gratitude and forgiveness combined for me to enable me to set goals and to look forward and to want to move forward in my life in order to achieve those goals. I mean, that was very, very true for me on the Shvil, and it's true for me in my life and has been since then. And I do believe it can be true for others who are seeking kind of solace and direction, facing their own personal challenges. And that's kind of why I wrote the book, to describe my experiences on the Shvil and how they helped me to move ahead with my life. I want to kind of finish with something fun, and that is a video of my arrival home, because it gives kind of another feel, having walked with me this far, I want you to join me as I come home with my daughter-in-law, my son-in-law, and my daughter, who are waiting for me, and prepared a little bit of a surprise. He was like waiting there at the corner.
Hey, she's coming. Hey, no, wait, I'm coming around, wait. Dad, you have to run through, wait.
And he falls and breaks his neck. So basically, that's my story. And this was my homecoming. After the Shvil, I quit my job. I found new goals. I did find new love. My caring and wise, patient, loving, beautiful, understanding, and wonderful wife, Miriam. I wrote my book. I started thinking about opening my own winery. I joined my very, very good friend, my brother from another mother, Yosef, in helping to bring renewable energy to Africa. And I can only say that through my experiences on the Shvil, physically, the lessons that I learned and the processes of the inner and outer exploration and personal growth during and after the trek, I discovered a path which I'm confident can be of enormous help to others facing similar challenges. Based as it is, these 5 elements of humility and acceptance and gratitude, forgiveness, and a sense of purpose, based as they are on time-honored wisdom and the work of giants. I mean, Talmudic sages and our Torah wisdom and modern psychologists and teachers and writers and what have you. That's my story of the Israel Trail, and I'm going to stop. I'm going to take a moment to look at the chats and the questions that some of you have, and I do have a few other views of Israel, which I'm happy to share also, because some other photos and videos that I took just in the last day, today and yesterday, of the Tu B'Shvat feel that we're enjoying now in this season of almost spring to round out our hour.
Not quite. The silence of the desert. But peaceful and tranquil nonetheless.
I'll stop sharing, Alicia, if we want. Just a few more images of just fun. I'm turning the sound down. This is from my bike ride yesterday. Let's see if I can chat as we're watching. This is also in the hills near Beit Shemesh. Of course, we're in a lockdown here, but you're allowed to go out exercising. So that I've been enjoying both bike riding and walking in and around the hills of Beit Shemesh, the foothills of Jerusalem.
A little hard to hear you over the wind, Aryeh.
I was just saying that this is the I was doing some bike riding, which even though we're in lockdown, you're allowed to do if you can go from your home. This is the last video that I want to share with you because it really gives a feel for this particular season in Israel as we reach Tu B'Shvat. These are fields of winter wheat right near my home in the foothills of Jerusalem. Well, I purposely didn't want to talk over that because just as we started with the silence of the desert, I'm really happy to end with the silence of the winter wheat in the foothills of Jerusalem. I hope you've enjoyed this exploration of the land and the connection to Tu B'Shvat. And Alicia, if you want to ask me a specific question, I'm scrolling through the chat also to see what some of the comments or questions are.
Absolutely, and I think you answered a few of them, such as the marks on the trail, which was very interesting. How they give you directions. Um, Somebody asked about Judy asked about who cleared the path or how many people trek it yearly.
So the Israel Trail was created in 1995, and there's actually a committee which includes the Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel and the JNF and the Ministry of Agriculture and Environment and the Nature and Parks Authority. And there are volunteers from youth groups and others that build the paths and clear them after the winter rains. And the path actually is constantly changing, adding new elements. They just added Masada, which when I hiked it 7 years ago was not included. I couldn't understand why. I hiked up to Arad, and you can see Masada in the distance, and I didn't understand, and I was very pleased when they added that. They added also a part going into Jerusalem. And so it's constantly changing. And there's my understanding is there's a few thousand who hike it every year, but there's also it's kind of hard to estimate that because there are, say, a few thousand who hike it like I did all at once. There's two seasons, one in the late winter, early spring, from south to north, and then in the late summer, early fall, where people hike from the north going south in order to miss out on the winter rains or the real heavy heat of the summer. But there are people who also don't hike it as a through hike. There are people and groups, many of them, that hike a few days a month or even just a few days a year. And also the Israel Trail is a combination of a number of hundreds of different trails in Israel that either existed before or were created since the Israel Trail was created. And so there's well, let's just say there's a lot of wonderful hikes that you can do in Israel when you next come to visit, or if you live here already.
So thank you everyone for all your great questions. There's questions about whether or not there's wildlife and what that's
Oh, I
like
see
on
that
the
one, right.
trail. There's questions about how you got resupplied with food, who took pictures of you, other hikes you've done. I guess you can choose from any one of those. I will also comment that a number of people have mentioned they really enjoyed your book, which I know is available for
Oh,
purchase, My Israel Trail, and others that mentioned that they bought it and look forward to reading it and actually experiencing it with you. So I'll let you answer a little bit more, and then I'll close out in the next few minutes. If that's okay.
okay. Well, thank you. For those of you who said you enjoyed reading the book, I appreciate that. And those who'd like to purchase it, of course, if you're here in Israel, I would be delighted to sign the book for you and send it to you. If you want to contact me directly, you can go to my website, myisraeltrail.com. It's also available on Amazon and Steinmatsky and what have you. But thank you for saying that. There was a lot of wildlife on the trail. And I ran across bobcats and jackals and all sorts of other small mammals. Nothing that was frightening or disturbing. Even the bobcat at night that I stumbled upon was just exciting, and he or she ran away after about 15-20 seconds. So it wasn't worrying. And somebody asked about who was taking the pictures. So I had a digital camera, which occasionally I put on a rock and took a photo of myself or a video of myself. One of the other
There more wildlife, sorry, in the north or the south?
Oh, definitely. I saw more wildlife in the south, and I suppose not being a naturalist, but understanding a little bit of what I at least observed there. In the north, there is just so much more shrubbery, trees, wild grasses, and what have you that there are places to hide, or at least that you don't see. I saw deer, and as you could see in one of my videos, antelope down in the desert. Saw deer up north, but they would kind of jump out of the way and hide behind a tree, and the same with others, and birds in trees and what have you. Whereas down south, it's a lot more noticeable. I mean, because they can't run away. It's just, right there in front of you. And I didn't feel any sense of danger. That's one of the important, I never felt, I actually own a gun. I did not carry my gun with me on the trail. And that's not just a question of wildlife. There has been no reported attacks by people on the Israel Trail either. It's very safe. There are reports there have been theft. There's theft on the trail. You have to be careful that when you go to sleep, you're sleeping with all your valuables in your sleeping bag. And I slept in a tent most nights, and that was also helpful. But wildlife, there's more danger, as my wife Miriam keeps reminding me, of falling off a cliff than being attacked by a wild animal. And Miriam has promised to do the trail with me again once her 20-year-old son is out of his IDF service, but we've agreed that we won't do any of the more dangerous parts of it. We're going to skip those when we do it together.
And are there organizations that would take people on the trail, or do you do tours?
Well, in fact, it's funny you should say it. There's a company called Via Sabra, which is a tour company, and they're doing a tour called Our Israel Trail in May of this year. It was planned for last year, and because of COVID, because of Corona, it was postponed. And they asked me to accompany a glamping tour, a 2-week tour of glamorous camping along the trail.
Sounds like my kind of camping.
Yeah, exactly. If anybody's interested in that, they can contact either Via Sabra or contact me. There are various different groups, desert tour companies and others, who do tours of Israel along the Israel Trail. There's a very important nonprofit group called Nifgashim B'Shvil Yisrael, Meeting on the Shvil Yisrael, which is a wonderful annual event of a few hundred people hiking the trail together, including dialogue in the mornings and in the evenings, especially focused on the issue of bridging gaps between more or less observant, I don't call them religious or non-religious, more or less observant Jews here in Israel. And every day starts out remembering a particular either soldier or victim of terror who's being memorialized. So Nifgashim B'Shvil Yisrael is a wonderful organization also to follow. There's a lot of information on the web. The Israel National Trail, I think .org or .com is a great site, and there are others also, which again, people are welcome to contact me through my website at myisraeltrail.com. I'm always happy to give a bit of insight and information if I can and if I can help. And if anybody who's going to be hiking the Israel Trail wants to let me know, maybe I can come join you for a day. I'd certainly be delighted.
Wow, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Aryeh, and thank you everyone for joining us. This was really meaningful, and I hope that everyone here joins me in feeling a rejuvenation and a connection to the land in starting off their holidays. So wishing everyone a Chag Sameach, a happy, meaningful, safe, and healthy Tu B'Shvat. And we look forward to being able to come visit you and see you on the trail.
See you on the trail, indeed. Thanks a lot, Alicia.
Chag Sameach.